Number 6. Hashima Island, Japan. Japan's Hashima Island is located 9.5 miles from Nagasaki. The island is relatively small and sometimes goes by the nickname Battleship Island, thanks to its shape. It was once a bustling mining and industry hub, but now it's completely abandoned. Hashima Island was first inhabited in 1890, after being bought by Mitsubishi when a coal reserve was found on the island. The population rapidly expanded, spurred on by the wave of industrialization sweeping across the country. Hashima Island was so advanced that a 9-story concrete building was built on it in 1916, and many more soon followed to protect the workers and inhabitants from typhoons. But this advancement came at a high cost. Many of the buildings were made by Korean and Chinese prisoners that were forced into labor between 1930 and 1945. The conditions were so bad for these prisoners that many of them were worked to their deathbeds. The construction undertaken by the forced laborers meant that thousands of people were living on the island despite its small size. At the height of its occupation, Hashima Island was home to over 5,000, which meant there was only 5 feet of space for every person. By the 1970s, the coal reserves were practically exhausted, so citizens and workers slowly began to leave. By 1974, the island was pretty much deserted, and nature was starting to reclaim it as the concrete buildings began slowly crumbling down. With many people flocking to the island over the years to explore the abandoned settlement, the Japanese government made the decision to open it to the public, which allowed them to make the site safer, propping up buildings so they wouldn't collapse on passers-by. Hashima Island was even made a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2015, but not without protest from Korean people. Tourists today can explore an eerie location that looks like it has come out of a horror movie. But that's not where the spookiness stops. Despite there being no electricity, fishermen sailing by have reported flickering lights in some of the buildings. Some people who visit the island have even felt cold spots, as if they were being watched, or even invisible hands touching them. Number 5. Bhopal, India. On December 2, 1984, an event at the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, would change the local landscape and lives of the people living there for good. An accident happened during the manufacturing process, which led to over 30 tons of toxic gases, including methyl isocyanate, to be released from the plant and across the surrounding area. The facility was not exactly an isolated area, since it was surrounded by shanty towns on all sides, densely populated by hundreds of thousands of people. Over 600,000 residents started to breathe in the deadly gases. Their throats and eyes began itching and burning, and many started feeling sick. Others suffered more severe symptoms, leading to blindness, and over 15,000 people lost their lives. This was not the end for the people of Bhopal either. Over the coming years, the contamination would lead to many babies and children being born with mental and physical health issues. Not only that, but it is believed that contamination of the groundwater in the area has also led to increased deaths and illnesses since 1984. The plant was eventually abandoned, turning into a rusting frame of iron and steel bars and pipes, becoming overgrown by vines and other plant life. After many protests against not only the current owners of the plant, Dow Chemical, but also Union Carbide, justice was finally served when on June 7, 2010, 26 years after the initial disaster, 7 former employees of Union Carbide were convicted of death by negligence. Number 4. River Country, Disney World, Florida. Abandoned theme parks always have an apocalyptic vibe about them and can definitely send a shiver up spines. But did you know that there is a deserted amusement park right next to one of the world's biggest and most famous resorts? River Country was the first water park ever opened near a Disney resort, and it welcomed visitors at Disney World Resort in Florida in June 1976. The park was themed after some old-fashioned swimming holes like those referenced in Tom Sawyer, with a pool filled with filtered water from the freshwater Bay Lake right next to it. It also pioneered the way for water parks of the future, with water slides, a lazy river, and a play area with swings and bridges to explore. Although it was a big hit at the time, River Country's downfall was due to its own success as a water park. More resorts opened up around the world, and Disney even opened 2 other water parks at the same site, Typhoon Lagoon in 1989 and Blizzard Beach in 1995. On November 2, 2001, River Country closed for winter maintenance like other attractions, but unlike the other parks, it did not reopen in the spring. Of course, with the closure, plenty of theories emerged as to why it shut down. One of the main ones is that it closed due to a brain-eating amoeba. Although an 11-year-old boy did die of amoebic meningoencephalitis contracted from the water, this was all the way back in 1980 and doesn't explain why the park would keep running for over 20 years afterwards. The most likely explanation is that it simply wasn't popular enough to stay open, especially after the decline in visitors to Disney World as a whole after the 2001 9/11 terrorist attacks. Instead of demolishing the park, Disney simply chose to fence it off, meaning that the attraction became famous amongst urban explorers wanting to see the deserted attractions. It would take almost 15 years before the lake was filled back in 2016, but as of today, there are still no signs of what might replace Disney's first ever water park. Have you ever heard of River Country, or did you visit it when it was open? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Number 3. Fordlandia, Brazil. Henry Ford was the visionary behind the first modern motor cars, but a lesser-known fact is that his vision also made a community in the Brazilian jungle. In 1928, Ford traveled to Brazil. Rubber was a breakthrough vital component when it came to manufacturing cars, much as it is today. Prices of rubber from Sri Lanka, where he originally sourced the material, were growing higher, thanks to the British monopoly over it. So the entrepreneur turned to Brazil for a cheaper, quick supply. Although it was closer and allowed Ford to ship the rubber directly to the manufacturing plant in Dearborn, Ford had a greater vision for his rubber plantation. He wanted to create a community based on his own ideals and values, Fordlandia. The city was split into two sections. One named Villa Americana was designated for American workers and had running water and scenic views. The Brazilian workers were housed separately, getting their water from nearby wells. Despite segregation, Fordlandia was rather advanced in its construction, with hospitals, schools, and even a water tower on site that loomed above the settlement as the most recognizable landmark. Ford's vision wasn't all that rosy though. It was hard to find people who wanted to work for him, thanks to the hard conditions, no matter the generous wages being offered. Many people also objected to the zero-tolerance policy on alcohol that was strictly enforced in Fordlandia. And the separation between skilled and unskilled workers led to friction between both sides, even resulting in a riot that forced many of Fordlandia's management to leave the area. Eventually, a new manager was brought in, Archibald Johnston, and the community began to flourish with paved roads, new housing, and more. Although the city itself went from strength to strength, the original reason for the venture, securing a supply of rubber, was not going according to plan. The rubber trees refused to take root in the Brazilian soil, and those that did suffered from blight and died before they could ever bear any produce. By the 1940s, Ford's health was slowly declining, and with the demand for military vehicles to support World War II increasing, it became up to his son Henry Ford II to take the reins of the family business. In an effort to streamline and cut losses, Fordlandia was one of the first things to be let go. Although the site was purchased by the Brazilian government and people over time made their homes there, it never returned to its former glory, with much of the manufacturing plant allowed to rust and decay. There is no longer a school or hospital, and at one point there were only about 100 people living there. In recent years, there has been a resurgence, with 3,000 people now calling it their home, with the water tower still standing to this day as a reminder of the failed social project of a great American industrialist. Number 2. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia is in the middle of Pennsylvania, not the place you'd usually expect to find a ghost town, but it is abandoned for good reason, since there's a fire burning under the ground there to this day. Centralia was a mining town with 2,000 residents in its heyday. The massive coal deposits under the earth provided employment. The material gathered was shipped out all across the USA. Business was booming in Centralia until 1962. During a routine trash burning, the fire managed to light up a coal seam, starting a deadly blaze that, thanks to the endless supply of fuel, was unable to be put out. For most, these flames went unnoticed for years, and only as time dragged on were the full details uncovered. Various incidents happened around the town, such as in 1979, A gas station owner found his underground storage tanks 100 degrees higher than normal, and a few years later, a boy fell into a sinkhole caused by the fire. Thankfully, he survived. More and more residents started getting sick due to the flames, even getting carbon monoxide poisoning from the fumes. Slowly but surely, they started to move out, and buildings were demolished. Now Centralia looks like an apocalyptic landscape. Half of the town is covered by forest, while random walls and stairs can still be seen. The sidewalks are empty, and stop signs stand tall despite there being no cars for them to warn. Route 61 is a stretch of highway that runs for 3/4 of a mile through Centralia. Instead of being filled with cars, the tarmac is now home to countless pieces of graffiti. That's why it's called the Graffiti Highway. Down the middle of this disused road, you can see a massive crack caused by the fire's heat burning below ground. It was this crack that led to the highway being rerouted away from Centralia, reducing visitors even more. The only signs of life in town can be found in the 2 graveyards, which are kept neat and tidy, with green grass and intact churches nearby in respect to this ghost town's dead. It doesn't look like people will be living in Centralia again anytime soon. Scientists believe that there is enough coal underground to keep the fire going for another 250 years, which will put off any building projects for the foreseeable future. Number 1. Wittenoom, Australia. It's not often that an entire village is completely wiped off the map, but that's exactly the case when it comes to Wittenoom in Western Australia. Even the road signs have its name slashed out, and for good reason too. The town is deadly. Wittenoom was once a mining metropolis, but they were mining an incredibly dangerous substance, asbestos. To add to this, the type of asbestos found in Wittenoom, crocidolite, is especially harsh. If it is breathed in, the fibers will fill the lungs, leading to aggressive cancers like mesothelioma, which is incurable. Usually those that have it only live another 2 years or so. One man who has a diagnosis of mesothelioma is named Maitland Parker. He was diagnosed back in 2016 and is defying all the odds. He's still alive today, partly, he believes, thanks to the fact that he needs to keep fighting for the people of Wittenoom's justice. Before the dangers of asbestos were known, the community used to thrive. Not only did it provide jobs for many people, but the trailings and offcuts from the asbestos floated freely through the air and were used to build roads and children's playgrounds. Parker even remembers his brother chewing on some of the fragments as if it was chewing gum. Out of the 20,000 people that once called Wittenoom home, 1 in 10 of them have died from asbestos-related cancer. The government made a call to buy up all the homes and make Wittenoom a ghost town to prevent any more deaths. The entire area is now contaminated. Each footstep kicks up dust and asbestos fragments, and even the water has traces of the material. Today, only 2 people live in Wittenoom, stubbornly refusing to leave. They are joined throughout the year by about 90 tourists who risk their lives to explore this lost town, despite the government's best efforts to keep them away. Former residents like Maitland Parker continue to campaign for the site to be completely cleaned to prevent any further deaths. Thanks for watching. Which one of these apocalyptic places shocked you the most? Would you visit any of them? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye.